Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're all really well. Today's video is going to be a little bit different, but it's something that I've been wanting to film for a very long time, but I've just never found the right moment, or I've never been in the right kind of mind frame to talk about it and do it justice. But it's something that I've spoken about on my blog many times, and I've also mentioned it on Twitter and on Instagram. So it's finally something that I thought I would bring over to my YouTube channel, and I think actually that video would do it justice because it's something very personal, and I think being able to talk about it on camera is a big step for me actually, but it's something that I think is important and hopefully it will connect with people better. This topic is actually something that I get a lot of emails about because my blog actually ranks top on Google for this subject. So I get a lot of emails from people all over the world who have exactly the same thing as me, and I feel very flattered that they share with me their story and ask me questions, because obviously I'm not an expert on this subject, I'm not a doctor, but I do feel very flattered and honoured that people want to share their stories with me. A few days ago I received an email from a dad in the States, and he said that his daughter, who was 14, had recently been diagnosed with the same thing. And I think his email really touched me because I was diagnosed at 14, and I know all too well just how difficult it can be to navigate teenage life, let alone having this on top of it. So for me, this is an opportunity to be able to speak to anyone who's going through the same thing, let you know that you're not alone and that there are lots of things that you can do to help manage it. So the condition that I really want to talk to you guys about today is IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, which is a very unsympathetic name for an equally unsympathetic condition. It affects around 1 in 5 people in the world, especially the Western world. And while people don't really understand the cause or why people have it, there are a lot of links to diet and anxiety and stress and things like that. But again, no one has been able to pinpoint one trigger, and it affects a broad number of people. It's not really picky. I've been suffering with IBS since the age of 14 when I was diagnosed, but I can remember having kind of a sensitive tummy and tummy troubles probably as far back as around aged 8. I remember being sent home from school on my birthday, on my 8th birthday, because I had such bad stomachache, and back then you don't really think, oh, there's something wrong with me, you just think it's tummy ache. But I remember when I was 14 and I was going through some exams, and there was a lot of pressure being piled onto us at school, and I guess that all kind of materialised into flaring up my stomach. And I remember when it started, I remember the exact moment. I was sitting in a lesson, it was the final lesson of the day, and I was sitting next to 2 boys, because I remember the seating plan at school had to be boy, girl, boy, girl. I remember feeling quite self-conscious that day and a little bit anxious. I'm not entirely sure why, but it was the end of the day and I was actually quite excited about the lesson. It was a media studies lesson and I'd never done that before, and I was very interested in becoming a journalist and a writer. So I remember sitting there, and all of a sudden my stomach started really hurting. It was like you needed to go to the toilet, but a really severe pain. And then my stomach started making these crazy noises, almost like you're hungry, but a lot worse and a lot louder. I remember coming out in like a hot sweat because I was thinking, oh my goodness, what's happening to me? I honestly don't know how I got through that lesson. I remember the lesson itself was about an hour long, and I just kept looking at the clock and thinking, please, please, please let this go away. I don't understand what's going on. I really needed to go to the toilet, but there was a kind of policy in our school that you could only go at break times. And I just remember feeling really trapped, and I didn't know what was going on. So I finished school for the day. And I basically went home and cried, and I told my mum, and I was like, I don't understand what this thing is. And she said, okay, well maybe you've got a bit of an upset stomach, you know, see how it is. But I think because I'd had that episode, every single lesson, that exact lesson on the exact day thereafter, I had what I know now to be panic attacks, because I thought it was gonna flare up again. And the rather unforgiving thing about IBS is that obviously anxiety and stress causes it, so you can be worrying about having a flare-up and it will cause a flare-up. So it's kind of a catch-22, and it's really difficult to deal with. But yes, I'm going to stop waffling about that initial experience, because since then my journey with IBS has been very varied. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest, but I've come out the other side. I feel really positive about it. It still affects me on a day-to-day basis, but I want to sit down and talk to you about it, because I think when I was 14 I would have really appreciated being able to go on YouTube and have someone share their story and say, you know what, I have it too, it's okay, you're not alone, and you can get through this. So to save me waffling, because my mum's actually watched my videos and she said that I waffle a lot, I have written down a list of questions that I would like to tackle in this video. I think they're the most important things that I would like to get across to you, and obviously if there's any questions you have, please feel free to leave them in the comment box below and I will of course answer them. So the first question, and probably the most important, is what is IBS? As I've mentioned before, IBS isn't really something that has a definitive trigger or something that's caused it, so you can't exactly pinpoint your symptoms. They're different from person to person, and how you're going to be able to manage them again is a case of trial and error, really. IBS is a collection of symptoms. It's actually kind of an umbrella term for these symptoms rather than a condition where you have all of them, but it can range from lots of lovely toilet troubles such as diarrhea, constipation, having to go to the toilet in excess of 12 times a day, which I have been there, done that. For me, a lot of the troubles I have is abdominal pain. So I've had times where I've been doubled over in pain. It used to wake me up in the night, and it was so painful that I honestly, as silly as it sounds, convinced myself that I was dying, because I didn't understand why I was having such bad pain. So the abdominal pain is a big symptom for me. It was probably the one that inspired, I say inspired, that's probably the wrong word, but for me to get better, because the abdominal pain was so bad, waking me up in the night, having me in tears. I couldn't go to university. I'll get onto that more later. The only way that I can really describe the pain is almost like having a knife ripped through your intestines. It's just such agonizing pain, and I've later kind of found out what causes that pain, and I know what to avoid in order to prevent that happening. But yes, it was a very long journey to tackling that. Another huge symptom for a lot of people is bloating. Now, I know bloating in itself is quite trivial. Everyone kind of uses the term itself when they're like, oh, I've had a lot of pizza, I feel really bloated. But this kind of bloating is all-consuming. It's so bad that I have sizes ranging from 8 to a size 16 in my wardrobe, because sometimes I literally cannot pull on my jeans. I will know when I've eaten something that I shouldn't, because my stomach swells up and I look like I'm 4 months pregnant. But it's also really debilitating, because you don't feel like you can go about your normal day-to-day activities. You just feel really sluggish, really horrible. It's painful and hard, and it's just a really unpleasant thing to have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Another symptom, as lovely as it sounds, is having a lot of gas or wind or trapped wind, which again is very painful in itself. So yes, the symptoms are rather embarrassing, which is why I really feel like we need to talk about this, because so many people shy away and suffer in silence because the symptoms are of a sensitive, embarrassing nature. But I honestly think that there's so many of us that go through this on a daily basis or suffer bouts of it throughout the year, that it's really not something that we should be embarrassed to talk about. And I think in itself, banishing that stigma is something that's going to help so many people, because it takes away the anxiety of it, in the sense that you can talk to people and that you can be reassured that people aren't laughing at you or thinking about you or you feeling embarrassed about it. So the symptoms themselves are rather trivial sounding. I suppose the best way I can explain it to someone that doesn't suffer is like having food poisoning, but every day, 24/7, especially when you're having a bad bout of it. I know some people have more severe IBS and some people it doesn't really affect them on a day-to-day basis, it's just kind of an annoyance. For me, I have had very, very severe IBS, and I've also found out kind of later on down the line that I have a extra long and loopy colon, which means that things get stuck because it's very twisty. And so food that I shouldn't really eat gets stuck in there very easily, which is what causes the abdominal pain. But yes, I will get into all of that lovely stuff later. So the next question I would like to answer is, how does it affect your day-to-day life? I'm lucky now that I have found ways that I can manage it, and I have done so much research that I know I'm very attuned with my body. I know what's happening, I know if I'm having a flare-up, and I know how to deal with it. So I'm very lucky now that it doesn't really affect me on a day-to-day basis. I feel very lucky that I am self-employed and I work from home and I'm my own boss, so if I'm having a bad bout of it, I'm not having to stress myself out by going into meetings and situations where I feel like I can't easily get out of if I do have a flare-up. So management on a day-to-day basis is through diet and probiotics, which I will come on to later. But in terms of how it did affect me on a daily basis, I would say greatly. There was one point at university where I honestly thought I was going to have to quit because I was pretty much bedbound. I had to be next to a bathroom at all times. I was waking up in the night and not getting any sleep because I had these horrible abdominal pains. I was ringing 111, which is the NHS helpline, saying, please can you send an ambulance? I feel like something is seriously wrong with me. And it was all consuming at that point. I couldn't do anything but leave my bed. And for me, that was very, very isolating. I think the emotional aspect of IBS is something that isn't touched upon very often, but for me it's really important because I know how socially isolating it can be. You feel guilty that you're not able to do the things that you want to do, but you physically cannot do them. I remember having to get a very kind friend to record all of my lectures for me, and luckily my lecturers were very supportive and they sent me the notes. But I remember feeling so guilty that I wasn't in those lectures that I would do probably quadruple the amount of reading and research that my peers were doing, which eventually was kind of good because I ended up getting a first-class degree and I ended up doing very well at university. It didn't hold me back, luckily, but there is that overwhelming sense of guilt that you can't do the things that you want. You also feel like you have to let people down, and social occasions you don't want to go to because you're not sure if there's going to be a toilet nearby, or you're not sure how you're going to be able to manage your symptoms. So on a day-to-day basis it can really range from the emotional aspect to the physical aspect, and obviously as an invisible condition it's very difficult to explain to people how it's affecting you, because you can look perfectly okay on the outside, but obviously on the inside there's a lot of turmoil going on and your body is really not feeling good. For me, when I had a flare-up, it would take me a good week or so to recover. I would feel so drained because you're sat on the toilet all the time and there is nothing inside of you. You can't eat anything. I would literally just be able to drink water and maybe some burnt toast and some plain rice at times. It just feels like your body is out of control, and I think it's that out of control feeling that causes the anxiety side of it. As I said before, I think the anxiety and the emotional aspects of it are really not publicised and talked about enough. There's always that feeling that something could happen or your IBS might flare up in a certain situation, And that can be very difficult. For me, my IBS stemmed into an anxiety disorder, especially whilst at university, where I would have very frequent and hideous panic attacks in situations that I felt I couldn't easily escape from or easily excuse myself from if I was having a flare-up. I remember one instance where I was doing shorthand, which is crazy kind of hieroglyphic type writing that journalists learn to do court reporting. It's quite a fast-paced thing because you have to listen to what the speaker is saying and be able to translate them and write them down as quickly as you can in front of you. So there's a lot of adrenaline, I suppose, building up inside of you in that moment. And I was in a room, a very small room with no windows, with about 60 other people. It felt very cramped, and there's all this kind of adrenaline, anxiety, nervousness building up inside you. And I remember having possibly the worst flare-up I've ever had, where I thought I was going to be sick and collapse and faint, and my heart rate was just going, and it felt like the world in front of me was swirling and I couldn't control anything, and it was just the most horrible, all-consuming, hideous feeling. And I think after that it got worse, and whilst I was trying every medication under the sun to help with the symptoms, there was this anxiousness, this anxiety disorder that I couldn't control no matter what medication I was taking. So yes, I think as a whole, IBS can be a mountain of issues that isn't tackled in the normal kind of NHS leaflet that they give you when they diagnose you with IBS. For a lot of doctors, they want to rule out all the other conditions, and that's obviously what you want, because as morbid as it sounds, obviously don't want it to be anything more serious, but they kind of just give you the leaflet and they're like, oh, it's just IBS, and which kind of trivializes it and makes you feel like, oh gosh, what am I making such a fuss about? It's just IBS, you know, I haven't got anything more serious. But for a lot of people, me included, it is really serious and it affects you on a day-to-day basis. It's really difficult to come to terms with the fact that that's what you have, and you have to find some solution through trial and error. So the next question, and this is one that I get asked a lot because obviously everyone is searching for that perfect solution and really wanting to take those symptoms away and just live a normal life. For me, it's been nearly 10 years in the process of finding a solution that has worked for me. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I have literally tried every single medication under the sun. I've also tried every treatment. I've tried hypnotherapy, I've had various allergy tests, I've had antidepressants, antispasmodics, pain relief. I've also had a lot of the tests, so I've had a colonoscopy, blood tests, ultrasounds. The colonoscopy was something that I wasn't actually offered on the NHS, but my dad paid for me to have it because it was at the point where I was at uni, and as I said, I was having such bad pains that I thought something was seriously wrong with me. So he said, I think we need to see a private gastroenterologist, which is what he did. And I had the colonoscopy. It was a hideous experience, don't get me wrong, but it actually made me feel better because it gave me the reassurance that it was something that I needed to tackle on my own. It was just IBS. And yeah, I think for me it gave me that reassurance. I knew I'd had all of the tests and I knew what I was facing. But honestly, none of the medications the doctors prescribed worked. I've had various laxatives, Imodium, or I think it's called loperamide, which is the kind of medical version, not the over-the-counter medication. Obviously there's lots of treatments for IBS that you can be prescribed, but there's also several that you can buy, you know, in Boots, over-the-counter, at the pharmacy. And I have tried all of them. I have found a way of managing it, and I've pretty much been symptom free now for 4 months, which is a record for me. I'm not going to say that this way will work for everyone, because As I said before, IBS takes many forms and you might have a completely different set of symptoms to me. My main symptoms were alternating between diarrhea and constipation, obviously the abdominal pain, bloating, and then the other kind of symptoms littered throughout. So after I'd had the colonoscopy, the gastroenterologist that I saw suggested that I would go on another set of antidepressants, which I really didn't want to do. So for the first time I turned around and said, no, I don't want to take what you've prescribed. I really want to try and manage this myself. This isn't something I'd necessarily recommend, as I've said, it just really worked for me. At that point I was so determined, so eager to find something that was going to work, that I did a whole load of research and found this thing called York test, which it hasn't been scientifically proven and it's not something that I suggest you necessarily go out and do. It's very expensive. I actually got a review of it, so they sent me the kit for free, and it came back and said that I had a severe kind of red flag intolerance, which is where they test your blood against the food, and if it produces antibodies then they kind of give it a red flag. So for me, I had cow's milk and eggs that came back, and I'd never really considered giving those things up before, but at that point, as I said, I was willing to try anything. So overnight I cut them out of my diet completely. I spoke to the nutritionist who came with the York test package, and she said, look, this isn't an overnight solution. It's going to take at least 3 months for you to see a difference. She gave me some meal plan ideas, and I really, for the first time in my life, because I don't have any willpower, honestly, I'm not exaggerating when I say that, for the first time in my life, I actually stuck to something. And within about 2 weeks, I noticed a drastic difference, but obviously you have to continue that in order to see the effects. I was the kind of person that would have cheese with every single meal, and I loved chocolate. I would have a whole kind of family-sized bar of Galaxy pretty much every night. So giving it up was very difficult initially, but I'm 2 years on and I don't miss it. Honestly, I'm not lying when I say that. Whilst, yes, I would love to have like a big slice of gooey chocolate cake, I don't like the way it makes me feel, and so to me it's kind of disgusting because I know the effect it will have on my body, and that's not something that is desirable to me. For about 1.5 years that worked, but then I started having a little bit of anxiety again, and I was travelling lots and my food patterns were interrupted. I wasn't always sticking to what I was eating completely. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had absolutely no dairy and eggs, but I wasn't having regular meal patterns. And so that turned into another flare-up. I think it was in August or September last year. I've also done quite a lot of research about probiotics, and I have tried a lot of them. I've tried the ones where you keep them in the fridge and they're liquid form. I've tried the ones where you take them before breakfast and they're in capsule form. I've tried ones that are kind of the drink, the dairy drink. Obviously haven't tried that recently because that would be very counterproductive. But yes, I've tried pretty much every probiotic, prebiotic, etc. on the market, but none of them I really had such a drastic difference that I felt like I wanted to continue with them. And then I came across a company that was really popular in America, but they only just launched in the UK, and I think they launched in Boots late last year. They're actually called Alflorex, and I gave them a go as a bit of a last resort when I was having a bad flare-up around the time I went to Iceland, so it must have been kind of September last year. I had a month's supply, so I kind of thought there was nothing to lose in giving them a try. And within about 2 weeks they sorted out my flare-up, and I was so impressed that I just kept taking them. The thing that I really like about these probiotics in particular is that they're really flexible to your daily life, and especially if you're traveling, they're really easy to take with you. You don't need a fridge to keep them in. You're going to be able to take them in your hand luggage really easily, and you can literally pop them in your handbag. You also don't need to take Alflorex at a certain time of the day, which again I find really helpful because I know with other ones I'll forget to take them, or if I'm really busy that day, again I might forget to take them, and if you miss that period before breakfast, then they're not going to work effectively. With these ones you can take them at any point during the day with any meal, or without food and you know that they're going to work. This tiny little bottle is a month's supply, so you can see how easy it is to fit them in your handbag and just take one out and take it when you're on the go. The container itself is insulated, so you don't need to put them in the fridge, as I mentioned. And yeah, it's just one per day. You don't need to take it with every meal. It's just really, really easy to remember and use, and obviously they work for me, so that's a bonus. I found since I've started taking these that if I do accidentally have something with dairy in, which has happened I think about 2 or 3 times when I've been eating out, I found that the repercussions of doing that are not as severe as they have been. So whether that's connected to taking the probiotics or not, I'm not sure, but certainly taking the Alpha-X has provided a lot of relief in times where I've been really fed up and not knowing what I can do to control it. So yes, my management on a day-to-day basis is obviously controlling my diet and taking the Alpha-X probiotics. I do try and get as much exercise as possible as well, because exercise really, really helps. It helps keep your digestion regular, and also making sure that you get enough fibre in your diet is really key as well, especially if you're prone to constipation. Just from personal experience, I would avoid things like chickpeas, beans, lentils, things like that, popcorn even sometimes, because they're really, really difficult for your intestines to break down, and sometimes that's why it can cause the pain and bloating. Now, there's a lot of research into dairy and IBS and whether it helps relieve symptoms. Obviously for me, I've found that it has helped to relieve my symptoms. Again, I've done a lot of research on that, and I've since found out, which is really interesting, that actually around 80% of us lose the ability to digest milk past the nursing age, which I think is around 5 or 6. Once we reach that age, we no longer have what's called lactase, which helps us to digest the lactose in milk. So while obviously we can digest anything that we put in there, it's much harder, and sometimes milk and dairy will sit in your intestines and in your colon and it will ferment, which is what causes the pain, it's what causes the wind, it's what causes the bloating, and it just creates unpleasant symptoms that you can rectify by not having the dairy. And the final thing that I want to touch upon is that you're not alone. There are so many people who have IBS, some more severe than others. Sometimes it affects their daily life, sometimes it doesn't. But there's so many people that have these digestive issues, and actually the majority of them are women, because it's twice as common in women as it is than in men. Young women in their 20s are also more prone to being diagnosed. I guess there's no winning formula with IBS. It's something that is very trial and error. Sometimes it can affect you really, really badly, and other times it can pretty much disappear, so you don't even remember that you have it. I feel really passionately that we should talk about it, and that we don't need to hide behind the fact that it's an embarrassing condition and there's a stigma surrounding it. Obviously, talking about poo in any sense is pretty embarrassing, and it's not exactly dinner party conversation. But hopefully this video will reassure you that you're not alone and it can be managed. It takes time and it takes a lot of research, a lot of trial and error, but there is a way to live with it and manage it effectively. With my anxiety, I went through a course of CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, and I found that was really, really helpful for me for managing those anxious thoughts. And when I'm in situations that I can't control or I can't get out of, it's kind of learning to manage those anxious thoughts running away with me. It's not stopping them altogether, because being anxious is not a bad thing. It means you're creative and you're caring and you're conscientious, but obviously you don't want them to manifest into horrible IBS symptoms. So I think with everything, it's about balance, and it's about knowing what you've got, knowing your symptoms, and not being afraid to talk about them. You know, for me personally, I literally talk about my IBS to anyone and everyone that will listen. Obviously not around a dinner table, because it's not what people really want to talk about when they're eating. But since I've shared it on my blog, so many people from my everyday life. So old school friends, people I know, people I work with, people I meet at events, they always approach me and feel comfortable talking to me about IBS, obviously because I've spoken about it online. To me, it makes me really happy because I think I've started a conversation and I've made that person feel like they can talk about it openly and not be embarrassed. Yes, hopefully this video has been relatively helpful and insightful in terms of my IBS story, and also knowing that it is possible to manage it and live with it. I still have times where I feel stressed, and I still have times where my stomach isn't perfect, but I've accepted the fact that my IBS is my kind of health flaw. Everyone has that one thing that is triggered, you know, when you're stressed. Some people get migraines, some people get a bad back, a bad shoulder. I'm at peace with the fact that mine is my IBS and my stomach is always going to be sensitive, and that's okay. My IBS hasn't held me back in anything. In fact, I think it's actually driven me to succeed and be passionate about the things that I really love. It's helped me to learn about myself and, as I said, be really in tune with my body. I have had people make nasty comments about my IBS and obviously the symptoms, and that's not very nice, and it did put me on a back foot at one point. But now I've learned to realise that that is their problem and it's not my problem. I have to be as positive as I can about IBS, because you can get kind of caught in a spiral of doubt and a spiral of, why is this me? Why can't I be normal? I remember so many times kind of crying on my mum's shoulder and thinking, why can't I just be a normal teenager? Why do I have to worry about going to the toilet? But it's just one of those things, and I feel really passionately that I want to talk about this. I want to make an impact, and I want to reassure you that you're not alone. There is a lot more that I would like to touch upon with regards to IBS, but this video would be about an hour long. So if there are any questions that you'd like me to answer, please feel free to leave them below, and I will hopefully maybe make another video in the future about them. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.